Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. Tonight we're here to talk about news in Giants land. They finally landed on a defensive coordinator hire. It's Shane Bowen. Now, the Giants had interviewed Bowen previously. The Giants were rumored to be interested in a couple other coordinators, Nard Wilson, who ended up going to the Titans, coincidentally, and Babbage, who ended up signing or, getting promoted from within to the Bills. Some may view this as a fallback option, Nick, but I like this hire. And I do think Shane Bowen brings something that the other two candidates who were at least reportedly, though I don't know if I believe those reports, whatever, viewed as top options for the Giants, maybe their first and second option. We don't know if that's true. We can just assume that, but we don't know. Is that he has defensive coordinator experience, and that is he has experience calling plays. To me, that mattered. I always felt like when Jerome Henderson got his due and he got his discussion as a potential candidate for the Giants, I was always like, yes and no, because I do get concerned with a guy having to call plays. We've discussed this on the pod like multiple times, Nick, usually on the offense side of the ball, but we've just, with your past, obviously, in football, we discussed like how fast and how quick things are when you're calling plays. It's not like I don't think these guys are capable of doing a Jerome Henderson, whatnot. It's just a matter of you never really know until you put him under the fire. With Bowen, he's done it before. And to be quite frank, I mean, we have the numbers on it. We're going to go over a lot of numbers, by the way, in this podcast that we already went over at one point when we discussed the possibility of hiring Shane Bowen. But there are new listeners, and a lot of you probably, may not even remember that pod. It was a few weeks. It was maybe a month ago at this point. So it's worth reiterating some of the numbers, some of the stats. But he did coordinate, one of the best defenses in football during the 2021 season with the Tennessee Titans. In that season, they finished 12-5. Bowen was promoted to defensive coordinator. They won the AFC South. They were the number one seed in the AFC. The defense was one of the best in the NFL, fourth in fewest touchdowns allowed per game, fourth best red zone defense in 2021 under Bowen, sixth best third down defense. These are the money downs, red zone and third down, and then sixth best in just total points per game. So top six across the board in the four most important categories in my mind to evaluate a defense. I always find total yardage, which people always say total defense. I always find that pretty lame because some defenses are bend, don't break. Some defenses are designed to give up yards. Some defenses are giving up yards because their offense is giving them a 4-touchdown lead. So what do I really care about total yardage? It's a BS stat to kind of determine which defenses are the best. So looking at those four stats, Nick, that's a pretty good year for the Titans and for Bowen in 2021. Obviously, the seasons after haven't been as great. And the Titans defense has obviously had some injuries. But what's your initial thoughts on the hire, Nick? And not just the hire, but like how the whole process played out for the Giants. Did they get their first guy and how long it took?
Yeah, they did not get their first guy. It's pretty obvious their first guy was Nard Wilson. But with that caveat in place, Shane Bowen was the second guy they interviewed. He was fired by along with Mike Vrabel by the Tennessee Titans at the end of the season. The Giants gave him an interview after Nard Wilson. The Giants were feeling out the Nard Wilson situation. Nard Wilson ends up taking the job with the Titans, and the Giants are like, hey, we're going to make a decision. All right, we're going to make a decision, I swear. And then tonight they finally made their decision on Shane Bowen. Look, I don't hate it, all things considered. Look at it from the perspective of a lot of the narratives that are going around Twitter right now. What defensive coordinator wants to come and join Brian Daboll, who might be a little bit hard to work with, who has a defensive staff already in place with most of the positional coaches in place, and this could be a one-and-done situation. The Giants could have done a lot worse than Shane Bowen. And I'm not sitting here saying this is a great hire, but for everything that Dan said, I think it makes a lot of sense. You're getting a young play caller who might have a little bit more freedom and might do things a little bit more differently because he did have Mike Vrabel in his ear for the last 3 seasons because he was his head coach. And he also had Jim Schwartz, who was a great guy to learn under, mind you, in 2021 and 2022. So yeah, there's a little bit of conjecture kind of reading through a lot of these stats because how much of this was Shane Bowen, how much of this was Vrabel, how much of this was Schwartz? We really don't know.
How much was personnel?
How much of it was personnel? Huge, right? But we do know he has called plays before. He has won football games before. And calling plays is no easy feat, as Dan did a good job articulating just a little bit ago. And if you want to look into the stats, there are stats to back this up, right? 3 years in a row, and a lot of this is personnel and all that kind of stuff. 3 years in a row, the Titans were top 6 in yards per carry. Now, they allowed more rushing yards totally this season, but in yards per carry, they were top 6. They never allowed at least 4 yards per carry. That says something, right? And everyone's like, is this a 3-4? And we get a question right here. I want to put it up. Thank you so much for the donation. He asks, Ones Navarro, look, looks like we're stick to a 3-4 defense. Sure. I don't really look at it. Oh, is this a 3-4 or 4-3? The NFL is much more complex than that, right? The NFL is much more complex than that. And you're in nickel personnel so much more than you were in base personnel. The Titans were hardly in base. They were in 3-3-5 nickel and 2-4-5 nickel, and they were in dime considerably. I think they were dime and 2-4-5 in like the 20s, like 27 and 26%, and they were in 3-3-5 a lot of the time. So you're getting that extra defensive back down. Now, you're not going to get a lot of blitzing with Shane Bowen. If we're going to just talk from a scheme standpoint, the 3 years he was there, they were bottom half in blitzing, bottom third in blitzing, I believe. And they didn't rely too much on bringing that fifth guy. They will bring fire zone blitzes, though, meaning there's 5 guys coming in zone behind that. That's something that they will do. They'll disguise a little bit, but it's not like Wink Martindale. It's a little bit more simplified than a Wink Martindale defense. They're going to rely a lot on pirate stunts, where the interior guy, is the looper, and it's the defensive tackles on the 4-man front who are going to be doing the twists. And then this is something else I've seen. I got more film I have to watch. Something else I saw when they had success getting sacks, and this is going to play into the hands of Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau. It's going to be wide rushers. You're going to have wide rushers flying up the arc. Who does that sound like? It sounds a little bit like Jim Schwartz, right? But maybe Shane Bowen will carry that over as well. So you need explosiveness to win around the edge, to open up B gaps, to allow the loopers, Dexter Lawrence in this case, to come through the B gap, or at least threaten the guard through the B gap, and then create confusion on the interior parts of the line of scrimmage. So that's how they get pressure. A lot of 4-man fronts, a lot of twisting with those 4-man fronts. And I'm excited for that. Look, I don't know if it's going to be as exciting as Wink Martindale's defense. It's different, but it's going to be a little bit of a difference. And Dan and I are going to be here to cover it and go through the film over the coming days and weeks and going into the season. And I think it wasn't a great situation with the Denard Wilson, not getting Denard Wilson. It seemed like the Giants were pushing to a corner, but the fact that they got Shane Bowen now at this point, and they're not just like Shane Bowen's like, all right, you know what, I'm going to bide my time and go somewhere else. And the Giants are like, well, if we hire Jerome Henderson now, everyone knows we didn't want him because it took us this long to interview him. I think it could have been a lot worse of a situation than what manifested.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there based on what you said. There's 4 different points I wanted to further on, so I'll try to remember them all. But I'll start with the first one, which is that, given the situation here, what we're learning now is the Giants will be retaining most of the same defensive staff under Bowen that's currently in place, that has their jobs now, which I think is a good thing. I think ultimately the Giants wanted to do that. They wanted to reward these coaches like Henderson. And typically you'll see a defensive coordinator come in and bring his own staff, or have a big, for the most part, get a lot of his own guys in, except for maybe 1 or 2 holdovers. That's not going to be the case, but that also definitely obviously played a role in the Giants' ability to hire who they wanted as a defensive coordinator, because you're coming into a coach going into year 3 with a GM going into year 3, uncertainty surrounding that situation for sure. And you're telling him you're probably not going to be able to just clean, fresh off the bat, get your own staff in here. You have to inherit some of these guys. We like some of these position coaches we have. Now he's going to have an opportunity to get his own linebacker coach. He's going to have an opportunity to get some coaches in here, outside linebackers. He's going to have his choices, but it's not going to be your typical DC comes in and gets his choice of whatever he wants. So start by saying that and keeping that in context. Now, adding to another thing that you mentioned, Nick, the blitz rate and how it's about to come down from going from Wink Martindale to Shane Bowen. Honestly, I don't know if I hate that much, Nick. It was fun to break down Wink Martindale tape. It was. And it was a very complex defense at times. They did some interesting things. Some worked, some didn't. But I did feel like at times some of the blitzes they called were not in the best interest of the Giants at times against certain kind of quarterbacks. For example, Dak Prescott this year kept blitzing him, continued to go at it. That didn't work. Things got worse. Brock Purdy, they kept blitzing at him, continued to go at it. That didn't work. Things got worse. Those quick processing quarterbacks, I don't really care what anyone says. Those two are very fast processing quarterbacks, Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott. They ate up that kind of style of defense, and there wasn't really an adjustment because it felt like that was just what it was under Wink Martindale. And I think that it could be a breath of fresh air. I have said in the past, Nick, that I like the defenses that dictate to the offense. I would prefer a Wink Martindale style in general here, Nick, but I do think at times that, you can look at it like when you're facing the best quarterbacks in the playoff, Nick, you're going to have to win a Super Bowl these days. You're probably going to have to go through Burrow, Allen, or Mahomes at this point. Maybe, there's a couple of years where that's different. On the flip side, who knows what's going to happen in the NFC from a quarterback standpoint, but it could be Caleb Williams and players like that. But if you're going to have to go through these guys, these fast processing quarterbacks, you have to, in my mind, come up with a different way to beat them. And I think, typically speaking, the teams that have had devised game plans, that doesn't work every time. Lou Anarumo devised a great one against the Chiefs a couple years ago. But those who have devised the game plans that are not as Wink Martindale blitz heavy, man coverage, get everyone on the line of scrimmage type of stuff, and then blitz them or simulated pressures, have had better success against those quarterbacks. And we'll see if that continues. I don't know, but it's something to keep in mind if the Giants do ultimately reach their ceiling with Shane Bowen, which is competing to win a division and to win a Super Bowl, and with him as their offensive coordinator. Now, one more thing there was two more things I wanted to touch on, Nick. Before I do that, do you have any thoughts on either of those two things?
Nah, man, you can get to
Okay.
what you need to touch on.
The third thing would be what you mentioned with the Pirate stunts. I personally necessarily don't know if that's a good thing. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing either, Nick, but I like when Dexter Lawrence is lined up on his man and just blows up that center off the ball. And I think it's a big advantage the Giants have. It's quick pressure up the interior against centers who, generally speaking, are overwhelmed by and cannot handle it. If you look at the tape of the Giants' wins, specifically their first win this year, Nick, against the Washington football team, Dexter Lawrence absolutely demolished Nick Gates in that game. Just made Nick Gates, the game was ruined, in my opinion, because of that. I don't think the Giants win the game without that matchup right there. And I think it really totally derailed everything the Redskins or the Commanders wanted to do. They had some, fixes from a schematic standpoint in the second matchup, moved the ball a little bit better, but turned it over a lot. But that first matchup was just dominated up front by Dexter Lawrence. And I like and I'm not saying that's going to take him away from that. He's still going to get plenty of opportunities to do that. But he's the type of player I kind of want one-on-one against the center as much as I can get him in pass rushing situations. So just something I was thinking about there. And then the fourth thing that you mentioned,
on that pirate stunt thing, though. I mean, it's not like Shane Bowen's going to go out there and be like, "Hey, we're going to do this every time." It's a curveball.
I know. I'm not saying that. It's a curveball to throw in there. Yeah. And as long as he doesn't over rely on it, that's totally fine with me. You want to use it as your curveball or your big play, that's fine. And I know he likes to put guys around the line of scrimmage as well and do things of that nature, though it's not as much, Wink Martindale style simulated pressures, but just something to keep in mind. And then what's the fourth? I'm blanking on the fourth thing you said. The fourth thing I want to touch on, so we can move on past that. But let's take a look at some of the numbers too with Shane Bowen here. I know you have some up here.
Yeah, these are just numbers from 2020 to 2021. He wasn't with the team he was the outside linebackers coach of 2020 when he took over the whole defense. The EPA per play improved from a 2020, which was 28th in the league, to 9th in 2021. Success rate, 28th to 5th. QBR, 25th to 8th. Yards per play, 23rd to 16th. Explosive play rate, 27th to 4th. Completion percentage, 22nd to 8th. And then the DVOA was 30th to 11th. So you had a substantial difference once he assumed the head defensive coordinator position. It's just still same time, though. You had Mike Vrabel in his ear. You had Jim Schwartz as the first year as a defensive assistant as well. So is that other point you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, I like that he has learned under Jim Schwartz, Nick. I swear, I feel like, who knows what kind of rub he had on him, Nick, but
yeah,
God damn, there's not many more people I want to learn defensive football under than Jim Schwartz. Like, I know he hasn't been in the league. He just got back in with Cleveland in defensive coordinator role. And look at that defense this year, man. And you're talking about the wide nine principles and some of what they might do up the pass rush arc. And if he can just bring that along with some of those principles, it may be kind of version of a defense that, he maybe learned a little bit in Houston with Vrabel, then kind of took some pieces of what Jim Schwartz does well, and you mix it up and you come up with your own defense. Because I think there's going to be a little bit more freedom, in my opinion, and I could be wrong on this, Nick, a little bit more freedom for Shane Bowen to create a defense from scratch as he wants to with the Giants versus with the Titans. Yes, it was his defense. He was coordinator, but it's also Mike Vrabel as your head coach. Mike Vrabel's a former defensive coordinator, like a defensive-minded head coach who you damn well know has influence over that defense and what they're calling, Nick. So to me, I feel like that's another upside to having Bowen. He's going to have his opportunity now to really to put his own mark on this defense, come up with his own system that fits this personnel grouping the Giants have.
And a lot of people also say the 3-4. Like, look, they will line in the odd front. What you're seeing on the screen right now, if you're watching, this is not an odd front, right? This is more of an even front where you're going to have your one technique, which is 93 Jeffrey Simmons. I got this, took the screenshot right at the snap, and then a 3 technique, or 93. I don't even know who that is. And then Jeffrey Simmons is 98, who's at that 3 technique. Well, what Shane Bowen did often when he was in this on early downs, right? This is a 1st and 10 against the Bengals. He would have the linebackers stacked behind these players. So when it was an odd front, you're not necessarily stacked. An odd front is what we saw from base personnel and Wink Martindale. You're going to see that in base personnel because this is a little bit multiple, right? This kind of similar to Patrick Graham where you're going to get different fronts. He would employ the odd front, which is going to mean Dexter Lawrence is going to be directly over the center. We love to see that, right? And then you're going to have 3 big defensive linemen, including Dexter Lawrence, between the tackle box, and then the 2 edge rushers on the outside, creating that 5-man wall. Remember when the Giants played the Tennessee Titans to open the 2022 season? They defeated the Titans offense because they stifled the run, man. They bottled up Derrick Henry. One of the means to do that was aligning in that odd front with the 5-man wall where they spilled everything to the outside. It's one reason why the Giants under Wink Martindale had so much success against these zone running teams, because they flushed everything out wide and then forced the running back to run laterally, run east to west instead of running north to south. And it's another reason why they were really bad against the linebackers, was because their edge rushers weren't that great against the run, and then their linebackers weren't in position to stop it. So it was a much more direct path for the offense. And it's one of the reasons why in 2022 they really were terrible against power gap concepts. But you're going to see this when the Giants now with Shane Bowen as a defensive coordinator, if he maintains similar tendencies that he had with the Titans, you're going to see this when they aren't in the odd front, when they aren't creating that 5-man wall with their big defensive linemen and their edge rushers. You're going to see stacked linebackers behind Jeffrey, or behind, it's going to be Dexter Lawrence in this case, and whoever the other interior defensive line is. So get used to this type of look.
Yeah, a couple other points I wanted to make, and this is for those, before I get into that, for those who are listening on the podcast, you can check out on YouTube the kind of look Nick is putting up. It's a film view from the end zone angle of a front that Shane Bowen deployed with the Titans. So just in case you want to take a look, it's on YouTube. But and at the 16-minute mark. But a couple other things I want to touch on, Nick. The first being like this whole idea of like, look, the Giants missed out on their top 2 picks for this coordinator position. This is kind of a retread in the sense, or somebody who was a second choice for them. And there's no real reason anybody would want to come to coach the Giants. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. If you really take a look at this film and then just look at kind of the last 2 seasons as a whole, this team is so fueled by the defensive side of the ball, whether that be in 2022, the big stops they had in the red zone, or the third down defense, or some of the big turnovers, the pick 6 by Landon Collins, the Kayvon Thibodeau sack fumble against Washington. Those are 2 game winnings, game sealing type of plays. The fumble, the Lamar Jackson plays in that game, the interception, the fumble. These are game sealing, game changing type of plays. And then you look at this season and the work that this defense did at times, literally winning them enough games down the stretch to have that 6th pick overall, which was mostly fueled by the defense, the turnovers, while also being in a bad position every game because their offense couldn't stay on the field or produce points for the most part. You're not going into the worst situation, in my opinion, as a coordinator. You want to go into talk about worst situation. There are teams this offseason, like, no offense, and I know he's taking over as head coach, but the Washington football team, where you can argue that like that defense is in a lot of trouble, especially if the kid out of the corner they took, I'm forgetting who was benched during the season. Forbes who was benched at times, like twice during the season. If he ends up not being what he was supposed to be, and the safety they took out of Illinois, they didn't get Brown, they got the other kid, Jartavis Martin, ends up not being who they're going to be. Like, they've already, entered the cupboard, emptied the cupboard with their defensive line, their stars on their line for the most part there. They don't really have the linebackers. Jamin Davison was supposed to be like, that's a worse job. Like, you got to come in and coordinate a defense with a lot of talent. Look at what happened to Shane Bowen this year versus Shane Bowen 2021. It's a totally different story if you look at the numbers, because the personnel was totally different. In the end, this is mostly fueled by the personnel, and you're giving Shane Bowen, Dexter Lawrence, Kayvon Thibodeau, linebackers took a big jump last year with both Bobby Okereke and Mega McFadden, right? Also potential for Azeez Ojulari, which is going to get into my next point, by the way, Nick, Deonte Banks, and maybe Xavier McKinney as your building blocks there, right? Those are the main core cog pieces, and it's not that bad. You have arguably, in my opinion, the most impactful defensive player in football. I really, truly believe Dexter Lawrence was that this past year and is that again next year. If you look at the numbers, the pressures he was able to get from a nose tackle, his pass rush productivity, the per snap pressures, all ranking within the top 10 among all pass rushers. No nose tackles ever do that. He was setting records for nose tackle type pressures. And I think that's only going to continue, even in a new system, because I think Shane Bowen's smart enough to see the tape and understand the importance of him. In addition to the rest of those kind of core pieces that may not be at the level of Dex, but close, I like it. And then it gets into my next point, Nick. The thing that I'm most excited about was, what is this guy's background, Shane Bowen? Well, his background is, he kind of came up with Vrabel in Houston with the Texans in that 2016 season where they had the number 1 ranked defense. That was the only time in Texans history they had the number 1 ranked defense. They allowed just over 300 yards per game, fewest first downs, second fewest passing yards per game. And, that was him coordinating the linebackers there and doing work with those linebackers. Then he comes over to Tennessee, does good work with those linebackers as well before his promotion, defensive coordinator. Harold Landry is a player who we loved his film at a Boston College, but he needed to be developed as well. He needed to be refined. They also had a few other pass rushers come up on that edge that, weren't big names, and especially during that 2021 run where they were the number 1 seed, Nick, played big roles on that defense. So what does that tell me? Is this the guy maybe who can, get us to that second to next level, maybe the next level with Kayvon Thibodeaux, who I think we're seeing flashes of, but is not fully refined or not where we want him to be yet, if we're going to be honest. And then 2, is this the guy to finally get the most out of Azeez Ojulari? Is there potential for that? But then 3, is this the guy coming in who's already worked with outside linebackers? You can answer all 2 of those and then this one as well. Who's going to have a nice say over those 2 high second-round picks if there's a nice outside linebacker on the board with pass rushing skills that he likes? Because you know what, Nick? At those picks in round 2, Nick, you know what? F it in round 1 if you feel like the player is worth it. I wouldn't mind, and I think the Giants are going to prioritize a potential edge rusher here. Because if you can get a guy in here who Bowen can work with, and he can unlock and maximize those 3 in some kind of rotation, now you're talking about a defense that could really take a different kind of jump next year. Because we all know from watching the Giants this year, when the defense did struggle, and it did struggle at times, is because the pass rush was not getting there, in my opinion. Because yes, you can talk about the back end, but to me, it was mostly just the pass rush was not getting there. So I think that's a big factor in here, the work he's previously done with the outside backers and with pass rushers.
So on the Kayvon Thibodeaux point, I think it's important to note, and I was talking with Ed Valentine, my boss. I don't really know what to call him.
Editor.
Editor over at
Editor
Big Blue View, who I just did a podcast with as well on the same subject. And he brought up a great point because he has much more insight than I do on because he gets to interview a lot of these positional coaches. Kayvon Thibodeaux has never been in a meeting or worked with Andre Patterson, the defensive line coach.
Wow.
Because Drew Wilkins, who is the protege of Wink Martindale, wanted Drew Wilkins to work with the top 5 pick because that is his guy, Drew Wilkins.
Sure.
So according to Ed, and he said this on the podcast, so it's not me, spoiling anything, Andre Patterson never actually had Kayvon Thibodeaux in the room. Andre Patterson got a lot out of Danielle Hunter. Andre Patterson has gotten a ton out of a lot of veteran players that he's worked with and young players that he's worked with. And I'm hoping now, whoever the Giants bring in to be their edge coach, and it's probably going to be this individual, and this is just off of familiarity, but the edge coach for the Titans was Ryan Crow. He was with the Titans from 2021 as the outside linebacker coach under Shane Bowen, and he was with Ohio State before that. Other than that, I don't really know too much about him. But if they bring him in, and Crow doesn't have this ego, maybe you can get some cross-training with Andre Patterson to hopefully maximize the hand usage of Kayvon Thibodeaux, which I would say is probably the part of Kayvon Thibodeaux's technique that we need to improve the most, is getting to that secondary pass rushing move and having a plan once your first pass rushing move is stopped. So that's one thing on Kayvon Thibodeaux. So from that sense, which isn't even Shane Bowen just being this excellent coach, it's just maybe not having to protect your outside linebacker coach's ego to be like, hey, no, he's going to, because that might've been what happened, what was going on with Wink Martindale, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to like speculate too much, but that could be what was going on. Like, hey, no, this is Drew Wilkins. He's going to coach this guy. Andre Patterson, you do you with Dexter Lawrence. No, I think it probably would have been best if we got some Andre Patterson on Kayvon Thibodeaux.
Yeah.
As for you
Go
talk
ahead.
about this point, and then I'll go on with the other points you were making.
No, I was just going to say that, I mean, it's already been reported. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN said, according to his sources, the Giants do plan to line up talks with current Titan staffers who worked under him. And that we could very well see some guys on the staff. Now go on. Sorry about that.
No, good point. Ryan Crow is the name to pay attention to. Azeez Ojulari, I think Azeez Ojulari fits into this system very well, because once you get on third down, you're going to use those wide rushers, and one of the wide rushes, and the best part of Azeez Ojulari's game is his explosiveness and his get off and his ability to get upfield and then flatten at the top. And when you have a wider rush, it's easier to do that. So if he could just stay healthy, that's really what it comes down to. And on early downs, I still think the Giants need to add an edge, preferably early in the draft, or maybe one of the free agents that Tennessee is going to have. They need to maybe add a veteran edge, because I don't want Azeez Ojulari to be playing a full-time role, not just because he's injured a lot, because I don't really have a lot of confidence in his ability to stop the run right now. I want to see Kayvon Thibodeaux improve with stopping the run. And I think Kayvon Thibodeaux is further along than Azeez Ojulari. It's not a great situation, Dan. So I think Bowen could get the most out of those two players, not necessarily just because he's this fantastic coach, but He will allow them to maybe work with coaches that were on the staff during Wink Martindale that Wink Martindale kind of prevented, which says a lot about him too.
I want to ask you a couple other schematic, I guess, discussions and guesses you may have, Nick, based on what we're getting out of Shane Bowen. I want to start at the second level. We saw a lot of progress last season with Bobby Okereke, who seemed to come right in. The first few games, we were kind of, biting our nails, Nick, and looking at each other like, oh, shit, did we blow it again with this free agent signing and all this guaranteed money? And it really looked like he was a little slow off the snap. He wasn't trusting his eyes. Then, boom, it all clicked for Bobby Okereke, and he became a completely different player. And in a lot of ways was, in my mind, snubbed of an all-pro. I really do believe that. I mean, if you look at the tape, it's like week after week. We had a whole season in 2022 where Dexter Lawrence was our player of the game on tape week after week, barely missed it. Then last year, past year, like Bobby Okereke stole that a few times from Dexter. And it wasn't because Dexter fell off. You look at the numbers, Dexter arguably had a better year by the numbers on a per pass rush basis. It's because Bobby Okereke took so well to this defense, picked it up, and once it clicked for him, it was dominant football. I also feel like Micah McFadden, year 2 in the system with Wink Martindale, things clicked for him. He was playing faster. He was playing, smarter, but also just more instinctually. Do you think that any of that will go away by changing systems? Do you think that, like, in your mind, just knowing what you know about football, I know some of this is a little bit of not conjecture, but just like projection from us as far as what we know the roles to be. But do you think we lose any of that momentum at the second level?
I think Bobby Okereke is a very good football player. So I'm hoping no, but there's going to be an adjustment period. So if it were to happen, would I be shocked? No, but I think he would figure it out because he's a good football player. And you're still going to be playing behind some odd fronts. You're going to be playing behind stacks, as I showed a little bit ago on the YouTube, which theoretically makes it easier for linebackers because you can react to one side or another of where that defensive lineman is, and you have a defensive lineman between you and the climbing linebackers trying to get on you. So you have a step, kind of. You have some space and some time advantage over the offensive lineman who's attempting to get on your lap. As for Micah McFadden, that's a little bit more difficult to read. Okay, because this is a young player who doesn't have the track record that Bobby Okereke has, who struggled mightily his first year in Wink Martindale's system, figured it out. Now this is a different system. So would I be shocked if Micah McFadden took a step back? No. Does it mean he's going to? Absolutely not. We just got to wait and see how he progresses. I'm still open to adding another linebacker because who is this third linebacker behind these guys right now?
Right.
Isaiah Simmons is a free agent. Isaiah Simmons wasn't that guy to begin with. Are you going to start talking about Darian Beavers?
No.
You start talking, you know what I mean? So there's really not a lot of depth on the Giants roster behind the starters. And there's really not a lot of depth on the Giants defense just in general. You look at every single position. What position do you look at? And you're like, man, that's a deep position right there for the Giants. The deepest position they have is defensive line. And right now, with Dexter Lawrence, who is arguably the best defensive lineman in the league, he's up at that level. This is still probably the worst defensive line the Giants have had in a while from a depth standpoint. Just look at the defensive line names. They had Dalvin Tomlinson, Dexter Lawrence, and Leonard Williams at one point. They had Snacks Harrison and Dalvin Tomlinson. And who was the other guy that I'm free? They've just been loaded on the defensive line for almost half a decade now. And right at this moment, you're like, you got Dexter Lawrence. Great. Who's playing next to him?
Right. And we do like DJ Davidson though. And we like Jordan Riley as well. But they're unproven. Exactly. You're right. Yes. But they're both unproven. And not only they're unproven in general as far as can they be effective at NFL level, they're unproven from the standpoint of can they take on a lot of snaps and can they play a lot of snaps? That we don't even know at this point. Like there's been no evidence to suggest that is going to happen or not going to happen. So both are under open-ended. And I think that's a good point by you. I have another question I want to ask about schematics, but before I do that, I just want to reiterate that point. Like this is as shallow of a defensive roster as I maybe can remember now. So that is coupled, Nick, with the sense of and the fact that this is better top end talent that I think the Giants have had at some spots. Like they haven't had a Dexter Lawrence level player, in my opinion, a very, very, very long time. The last one for me would be Justin Tuck, if I'm going to be honest. Like you can talk about JPP. Maybe there were moments of him. I don't really, especially that rookie, maybe the first two seasons, sure. But after the injury, whatever you want to call that, the accident he had, I don't think he played at that level ever again. And I don't even quite frankly know, like this level Dexter Lawrence played at last year, dude. It's like it might have even beat Justin's best season. It might have even beat OC's best season. It might have even beat Michael's best season, but it definitely had a chance to beat those first two guys' best seasons. And then you also have
2 years in a row too, man.
Right. And it's 2 years in a row of that. So it doesn't feel like it's going away at all. So there is some top end talent. Like I don't know if they've had a corner this caliber in a long time. You could say maybe Adori's first year or Janoris Jenkins.
I disagree with that point. I think James Bradbury was a much better corner.
And Bradbury, yeah. These are all fine to say, but they were also a lot older at the time. Like all three of those guys were veterans. I still feel
there's a
like
ceiling with Deontay.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's more what I meant.
Yeah.
This is the high end of the ceiling potential with Banks that we don't know. And I even feel like that's still there for Kayvon personally, especially if Bowen plays a role in developing him and his pass rush moves and his hand usage. If he does get to work a little bit with Patterson. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I had one point about the Kayvon. So one thing that I've heard from Titans fans, and when I looked it up on PFF, they were a little annoyed that Harold Landry dropped into coverage so much. So this past year, he dropped into coverage 89 times, which I think is like slightly less than what Kayvon dropped. But back in 2021, because he didn't play in 2022 because of torn ACL, back in 2021, he dropped into coverage 149 times. So the thing about Shane Bowen's defense that I respect, we talk about disguising your coverage. Look, he disguises on the back end. It's not the most exotic defense, not as exotic as Wink Martindale's, but it's not like uber simple either, right? Like he'll line on a lot of too high, rotate down, aggressively rotate down towards the possible destination of the running back, which could set up some play action shots against you, but they want to fit the run well when they have lighter boxes. So they're going to have those aggressive safeties flying down. But there's a lot of simulated pressure. Simulated pressure means I'm going to bring 4. You don't know a 4. And one of the guys you think is going to come, there's probably in your protection checks as an offensive line, he ain't going to come. Sure. And what did that mean? That meant Harold Landry a lot of the times, because a lot of the times you're going to slide your protection towards the best pass rusher, which is Harold Landry. Similar to what's happened to Kayvon this past year, only I think you got more of a crowded line of scrimmage than you're probably going to get with Shane Bowen. Shane Bowen will crowd the line of scrimmage, but Wink Martindale really crowded the line of scrimmage. You know, that's like New Year's New York type stuff with Wink Martindale. So that's one thing that we can expect. I like that because it disrupts and manipulates opposing protections. When you only send 4, you're dropping everybody else back into coverage, but you can maybe get an advantage because you don't know which 4. So he'll do that and send twists on top of it to really take advantage of what the offense is trying to do from a protection standpoint. But it's going to lead to some more KT dropping into coverage, which would piss probably some Giant fans off.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love it either, but it's part of the schematics of it. You want to try to get the deep, like you just said, you want to get the offensive line shifting their protection to a spot where there doesn't need to be protection shifted to. How many times did we see during Wink Martindale's tenure, the Giants on tape have opposing teams' offensive lines, 2 guys at a time, sometimes blocking air? Well, they had 2 guys against 3 guys on the other end. And that's something you always want to get, an advantage as a defense. So I think it's something to strive for. Obviously, we had some frustrations with the amount of times Kayvon dropped in coverage there, but it is what it is on that front, Nick. And I also wanted to talk to you about the schematic side of it with Xavier McKinney, because he, to me, if they do decide to resign him, and I'm really hoping the Giants do use their big free agent money on McKinney, that's, to me, the big move here. You got to bring McKinney back, in my mind, at least. I personally believe that very strongly, given his age, given the state of the position for the Giants, and given what he's put on the field and played every snap. But I personally feel like if I'm excited about one player the most in this new system, it might be Kayvon and then Ojulari, just based on the history with Bowen. But from a schematic standpoint, Nick, it very well might be Xavier McKinney, just from a development standpoint, it's the pass rush. From the schematic standpoint, maybe it's McKinney, man, because I personally never felt like the Wink system was the best fit for McKinney's skill set. I think he played it well. He did all those roles, and he was able to, just like he was at Alabama.
Because he's a good football player.
He's a good football player.
Yes.
He's a high IQ football player. It can still work. It doesn't mean he can't do those jobs. And by the way, when you show them on film, the coaches that you can, they're going to make you keep doing it because they don't have anyone else who can do that on the roster. But it doesn't mean he's maximized in that role. I still think Xavier McKinney is maximized as a football player when he is playing the post, or he is playing in the deep half, and he is able to use his instincts, his spatial awareness, his eyes, his vision, and his ability to take those angles toward the path of the ball to either get his hands in there for an interception or a PBU or anything to alter the play in a massive way. And I think he's going to have more opportunities to do that under Shane Bowen. I think that's almost undeniable given what we've seen of the Titans and their usage of safeties. Also, the safety who, I'm blanking on his name, the safety who went to the Eagles in the middle of the season.
Evan Byard.
Tennessee. Yeah. During his prime,
Pick
dude.
Yeah.
What'd you say? He's a
pick
magnet during his prime. An absolute pick magnet during his prime. And yes, part of that is him as a player for sure. But part of that could be the system he was in and how the coaches utilized him. And I'm sure if you're Xavier McKinney, this might be a good, if you're on the borderline, you're McKinney, you're going to get a good offer from the Giants, I think, almost no matter what. That's my personal opinion. We'll see if I'm wrong about that. But, you want to come back. You don't want to come back. You're wondering, what's going to look like in the new system. Well, just show this dude some film of Kevin Byard and him in his prime. And as you said, a pick magnet. And that could excite McKinney, because I do honestly believe McKinney is at his best when he's playing that deep coverage role. And the Giants are at their best with him there too, man. Like, even if you look at some of the stuff with Graham that McKinney did, it was just phenomenal, fun football to watch on film. Fun to have a safety who's able to do that. Not as much accentuated with Wink Martindale, in my opinion. Maybe that can change with Bowen.
That's the hope. And I think you're right too, because I think you're going to see a lot more Xavier McKinney in the post, which I believe he can do very well, or disguised, because again, this is a defense. It's going to align too high, disguise, rotate down. They're going to do stuff like that, not as exotically as Wink Martindale. It's also a defense that ran zone coverage a lot more than man coverage. I think they only ran man coverage like in the 20%, which is, I want to say, a lot
Zone's
less.
coming, baby.
It's going to be a lot more zone. It's going to be match type zone. It's not like spot drop zone or country zone, if you want to call it that, where it's like, well, this is my area and I'm dropping to it. No, it's probably going to be a lot of match principles, especially against, uneven front or unbalanced, I should say, type of offensive formations. I'm excited to see exactly what he does, because also we're basing this off of the Titans and what he did with the Titans, because that's all we can do. And there's conjecture there. There is, because we're not 100% sure if we're going to see the same thing. We don't know exactly what his philosophy is. He had a defensive head coach. He had Schwartz in his ear, and now he has different personnel. Sure. So this could be a coordinator who is very flexible, which I would love to have. Somebody who isn't rigid and somebody who doesn't try to fit square pegs into round holes. And this is all stuff we're going to be talking about throughout training camp too, Dan. There's going to be a lot of information on just like the little reports that we can get from people on the beat, people who are at training camp, and then we'll start to see it manifest a little bit during preseason and then into the season. But one thing I will say though, man, and the schedule hasn't been released, every time the Giants get a new defense, it seems like they struggle initially. So that's something that we might need to be weary of. Oh, dude, Spags moment is the best example.
Yep.
It's the best example. Dude, literally the Giants might not have won the Super Bowl if Mike Sellers, I think his name was, the fullback for Washington, didn't get dragged down at the goal line to set up that goal line stand at the end of the game in week 3. I always think back to that.
Game of inches, the NFL. Literally, you're right. If that play, that goal line stand the Giants made in week 3 against Washington doesn't happen, they probably don't win the Super Bowl. And do they ever win a second Super Bowl if they don't win it first? That's another good question. Do they move on?
Would be like Jet fans right now.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's
God.
It's the great mystery, and that there's so many of those butterfly effects in football from year to year basis and then overall. But I do want to bring up something though. I do think you make a good point about how we don't want to drive too hard on past numbers because of the personnel differences. But philosophically speaking, I do think that we can use the data we have, Nick, and the evidence we have to suggest we probably are going to see a different type of defense philosophically, from the standpoint of it's going to be more bend, don't break. And it's going to be a little bit closer to what we had with Patrick Graham. These are some great stats from Doug Analytics, big time friend of the show, that he put on Twitter a little while ago. Even in 2023, these are stats from 2023 when, guess what? The Titans traded Kevin Byard, their star safety. They had injuries all across their defense. They're just battered and bruised, beaten. Found a little bit toward the end of the year, a little bit more success, started to get even with all the injuries. But these are numbers from the 2023 season, not Bowen's best season as coordinator, but still interesting numbers. The Titans defense in 2023, Nick, allowed the fewest percentage of red zone drives to result in a touchdown.
Oh, yeah.
They also, now that's a great news, right? Great job, Titans. You did a great job. Once they got in the red zone, you clamped down, you forced the team to kick 3, or you turned it over. Now, that's the good news. The bad news, Nick, is of the 61 drives that Tennessee allowed into the red zone. Oh, no, this is more good news. Only 23 result in TD. Okay. But of 177 total drives the Tennessee defense was on the field for, they allowed 61 of those to enter the red zone. That was second worst in the NFL. So what is that saying? Best red zone defense, but also allowed the second most drives to go into the red zone. So that's very bendy, don't breaky to me.
Do we have explosive play rate from 2023? Because
sure
just going off of watching football, they couldn't cover a lot. They gave up a lot of explosive plays. Now, I could be wrong there, but I want to say, looking at their secondary, especially after they traded Kevin Byard, it was like, oh, geez, man, the Titans are just falling apart. And they weren't as good against the run in its totality, but they still allowed only, I think, 3.8 yards per carry, which is something that really interests me. I want a team that knows how to fill. But again, a lot of that could have been the players that they had at Tennessee. The Giants don't have those horses. You have Dexter, but is DJ going to take that step? Is Jerome Riley going to take that step? Is Nacho going to
take
another step?
The edge better too, because you were right.
Yeah,
Both of them need to play the run better.
I know. It's so that's why I find this fascinating. I think you're going into this draft though, man. If you're Joe Shane, there's so much. Like, I'm so glad the Giants have that second round pick that they got from Seattle for Leonard Williams. Like, what a home run trade.
Thank God they made that move.
Dan, like, I've been studying this draft a lot recently. We're going to really get into our draft stuff soon. This draft is fun. It is so fun. There are so many players that are going to be selected in like the 20s that we would have been talking about in the top 10 of the 2022 draft. You know, that the Giants might have selected with the 5th or 7th pick if those players were in that draft. Like, this draft right now has some really good and talented players. So there could be some guys who slide to 70 that would have gone around the 40 or 50 range. The Giants can now put on this defense and help shore things up a little bit for Shane Bowen.
I love to hear that. And I'd love to hear them, again, get a linebacker, an outside backer that he can work with to develop into a pass rusher, come up with a plan for him and have him kind of evolve into a player that can be a steal for the Giants. I think you can get those kind of steals sometimes in that range of draft pick capital. And just to throw some numbers behind a point you brought up earlier, Nick, about how, and this goes into a little bit of what I was talking about just a few minutes ago with how we should be expecting a little bit of a philosophical change on the Giants defense. Well, you know, over the last 3 seasons as coordinator for the Titans, Bowen was 24th in blitz percentage, 26th in blitz percentage, and 28th in blitz percentage. So those are, you know, very, very, very low numbers. I mean, he did not, compared to the rest of the league, he did not blitz often. And obviously, you go from Wink Martindale to that. It's a big change.
So what does that say, though, too? Now, you always need this, but you're going to need some guys who can cover. You're going to need some smart cornerbacks who can cover. You're going to need some athletic cornerbacks. You always need cornerbacks, right? You need cornerbacks on man coverage when you did bring the blitz and they were by themselves, but now you're going to need those safeties. And I feel like the Giants, if they retain Xavier McKinney, you're going to have those safeties, but you're still going to need those cornerbacks who can stick to receivers in pattern match and man type of principles to eliminate them. And I don't think the Giants have that right now. Like, the Giants, you have Deontay Banks, Adoree Jackson's walking out the door, and who's the next cornerback that you're looking at on this roster? Cordell Flott?
Right. I mean, if you're counting on Flott, we don't even know where they're at with Flott right now, right?
I know, man. So it's there's some work to be done. There's some work to be done.
There is some work to be done, and we're going to have to see where they go with it. But it's definitely very interesting. I like that he took over play calling as a 33-year-old. He's still, you know, he's still a very young option at the NFL level with a lot of room to grow in my mind as a coordinator. And I just am excited about him getting to put his own, my opinion, fingerprint blueprint together as a defensive coordinator, given the personnel he's going to inherit, the personnel he's going to be able to add with free agency in the draft, and just not having Mike Vrabel over your shoulder, which is not a bad thing necessarily. It could be a good thing, but it just gives him so much more freedom and flexibility to do what he wants to do based on the things he's learned going through years with Vrabel, but also with, learning from Jim Schwartz.
He does have hair, which is something, right? And as Sal, he's not a content creator on Twitter, as he pointed out, he does look a lot like Ted Kaczynski. So there is that going on too. He kind of looks like the Unabomber a little bit.
That's interesting. I haven't even looked into that one yet, but I'm sure that's true. It makes sense.
So a couple more things before we get to some of these questions. I went through and I found some stats on how they got the 45 sacks that they had this year. 45, that was about middle of the pack, right? I think I put it on Twitter if anybody wants to see exactly where it was and where it fell. A lot of those were just through twists. And a lot of the other ones were through simulated pressures. About 10 of them were from 5-man blitzes. So 5-man pressure, a lot of those 5-man pressures were fire zone blitzes, with zone on the back end, bringing 5 guys somewhat disguised. He will disguise those. And I think there was only a few that were 5+. So that's just completely different than what we saw from Wink Martindale.
Well, I like that stat.
Let's go to some of these questions. Okay, we said the first one. So Justin Boyce, thank you so much. Justin asks, the defense, offensive line, special teams, it's not going to matter. Everything will be laid at the feet of Daniel Jones. If he plays well and uses every part of the field, the Giants have a shot. Well, Justin, I'll say this. If he does those things, the Giants will have some sort of shot. I don't think the infrastructure with the New York Giants right now is proven. That doesn't mean they can suck. I mean, it was just 1 year ago that they won a playoff game, which is something the Giants hadn't done since they won the Super Bowl back in 2011. So this coaching staff has proven they could do it, or they can do it. Daniel Jones has done it. Can he replicate that with better offensive weapons, I would say now, depending on what happens with Saquon Barkley, which is a conversation Dan and I will be talking about soon.
Yeah, and I think the ceiling goes into what you're talking about, Justin. The ceiling of this team does lay at the feet of Daniel Jones. I don't think that's, to me, any denial. But that ceiling, the pressure that you're discussing, or the onus on how he's going to play next season, is amplified if they do use that 6th pick on Neighbors or Adunze, those two receivers that a lot of people view as blue chip talents. And you give him a blue chip talent receiver. I mean, as long as you can just get Brasil to give you an average offensive line, at that point, what more can you ask for as a quarterback? If you can get the O line to average with Neighbors, Hyatt, Wandale, Hodgins, who I think still has Slayton if you want him, Waller if he's healthy, and who knows, maybe they re-sign Barkley, and if not, who cares? Maybe you draft someone who's explosive and juicy, and has juice, I should say, and that was weird, has juice, and if the offensive line is playing at an average level, that matters more than the running back playing at a higher level, in my mind anyway, in the mind of most NFL guys. Hence, watch the Chiefs. Hence, watch all of these teams. The Dolphins, Raheem Mostert, okay? So, I mean, look, it's possible, but once that happens, to me, if they can get this offensive line to average play and they get Neighbors type talent or whatever for Jones at that point, that's it. Like, that has to be the last excuse laid on this. There's no more
if there's any excuses left at this point.
Yeah, it would have to be that. But yeah.
Chris Perry, JJ McCarthy worth a pick in the second? Could shore up this D with a cornerback and defensive end high in the draft. You guys watch Kill Tony on Mondays. You know what, Chris? I don't watch Kill Tony, and that's something that other people said, Nick, you would love Kill Tony. You got to watch Kill Tony. And I do like Tony Hinchcliffe, so that's something that should probably jump on, Chris. Kill Tony, Monday comedy on YouTube. As for JJ, look, I haven't grinded through the Michigan offensive tape. From what I've seen, if you're saying, hey, this guy could be a possible option to be a quarterback in the league for a while in the second round, that's something that definitely entices me, a la a Derek Carr or a player like that. But is that the direction the Giants are looking to go? I'm not 100% certain. So I'm going to reserve until I actually get my eyes on the tape.
Yeah, that's I haven't seen Kill Tony, but I've seen clips on like Instagram. He's the dude the Tony guy who runs it. He's the dude who like dresses up as Dr. Phil every time, right?
Does he dress up like Dr. Phil? I'm not
Someone on that show puts on like a Dr. Phil thing.
Tony Hinchcliffe is a very, very skinny, somewhat effeminate comedian who a lot of people make fun of for that.
The same guy then, but maybe.
No.
And one of these dudes has like a Dr. Phil thing going or something.
But
they have some funny clips. They had I'm trying to remember now, but they had a dude go up there who's mute, and like he's a mute comedian, so he just kind of talks with like an AI voice or whatever. So it's definitely some funny stuff, and we're doing some more comedy lately. Nick and I have actually took a trip a couple months ago at this point to see a comedian at the Dojo in Morris Plains, which is actually a pretty good spot for comedy, I think. And I was lucky enough to see Mark Norman there actually 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he was absolutely phenomenal, like just an unbelievably funny set. He had a joke that was just wildly funny to me. I'm not gonna recall it because I'll get it wrong and I'll mess it up. And I hate recalling jokes that I don't remember.
You're live right now, Dan.
Exactly. But as far as the other question you made, yes, they could go CB or DE or high in the draft. I think that's on our radar. McCarthy, I haven't watched a lot of McCarthy. I am a little bit worried about his size, if I'm going to be completely honest with the situation, and his arm talent, though. Some people love his arm talent, and I've seen some decent clips of it. Is he a drive thrower outside the numbers from within the pocket? This is something that I'm wondering about. Is he an explosive thrower? He might be. I have to watch more film to get a better feel for that. I don't have a good feel for that right now, but I know one thing. The stat Nick brought up the other day, to me, is the exact reason there was no ceiling with the 2022 Giants offense that finished dead last in explosive pass rate, because the Giants attempted just 33 passes in 2022, the breakout season, quote unquote, for Daniel Jones, that were 10 plus yards outside the numbers. That's over 17 games. That's 2 a game. You just can't expect to go anywhere with that. And they need someone who can throw outside the numbers, beyond 10 yards and beyond the sticks, at least 10 yards, and do it consistently. So you have defenses that have to cover those areas of the field, and that opens up other areas of the field. And it's just all what it comes down to. You have a power drive thrower. At least I believe in this offense specifically, with the concept Stable and Kafka have run with Taylor, with Jones, and with DeVito, that's important. So it's just going to come down to where I view his arm talent. I have to watch a lot more, especially because he was so hidden in that Michigan offense, in my opinion. Yeah. And that sucks, but that's just part of the process. But I'm going to keep an eye on it because I'm looking for that. I just put a tweet out today where I was basically like, look, I'm not going to be disappointed if the Giants don't go quarterback at 6, if the quarterbacks go 1, 2, 3, Daniels, May, and Caleb, because it's just how the cookie crumbles. They had all those turnovers against Washington, 6, I believe. Mac Jones punted away a game to them, and they won those 2 games, and they don't have an opportunity at one of those 3. And in my mind, you get to a point with quarterback where you're better off just taking a swing in 37 and 49, or one of the 39 and 47, one of those 2 second-round picks. And people are like, that doesn't make sense to me. If you believe a quarterback can be potentially the guy, you get him at 6. That's it. But like, the part of it that makes sense to me that I'm going to try to, maybe get across to you, if you don't believe that or you're on the other side of it, is look, there's an opportunity cost to drafting a quarterback at 6 versus 39. If you draft a quarterback at 6, you're passing up on a Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze type of talent, or one of these linemen, or, Josh Allen, the pass rusher. Yeah, Josh Allen, the pass rusher, like 2019. But if you do it at 39, you're not passing up on a blue chip anymore. You're passing up on a wide receiver you love that fell. And yeah, he looks like he could be good, but had some flaws. And maybe he's not a real blue chip, or a lineman that has some flaws and is not a real blue chip, or an Ojulari type, or, a Wandale type. Like, these guys aren't blue chip type prospects, but you lose that at 6. So to me, it does make sense. I'm looking for traits, though. I'm looking for the ability to develop. So like I said, I'm not going to be upset with this team if they don't go quarterback at 6. They kind of dug their own hole with those wins. But I will be upset, Nick, if they don't come out of the draft with any quarterback with any kind of skill set that they can try to develop, like a Hooker in round 3 last year, something like that this year. Because you know what?
The Lions.
Yeah.
Call the Lions. Make a trade.
Yeah, but people have talked about that. I don't think they're going to trade him. But look, like, my point is, like, come out of the draft and give us some damn hope at the quarterback position, to be quite honest. Because just going to be honest with everyone here, if he's taking up 18 to 20% of the cap like he is, Jones, I don't have any hope to be a consistent division winner and a consistent Super Bowl contender. 20% of the cap to a talent like that's making that kind of impact on the field, it's just not going to work for me, and I doubt it's going to work for us. I need some hope at quarterback, and that doesn't have to mean stretch it and take a quarterback at 6 just to take a quarterback, but find somebody you like that you think has developmental traits, like the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts, and take a shot, man. Take a chance. It might not work out. You're taking a quarterback anytime you take a quarterback outside the top 10 or 15, it's probably not going to work out. Look at history. You're banking on an outlier. Guess what? If you take a quarterback inside the top 10, it's not always going to work out. Even top 5, even top 1 isn't 100%. It's like 40 something percent for those even top 1 dudes. So like, you have to go into this understanding this might not work, but you also have to understand that, like, what am I giving up at that pick 39? I'm giving up an Ojulari type. That hasn't worked. McKinney type. It's worked, but that's one. And then you're giving up those types, Wandale Robinson at 40, whatever. Like, those are the types of players you're giving up. It's different than what you're giving up at 6, to me, at least.
And you have to also consider, if this player possesses the traits that you just said, you have someone who has maximized traits before in Brian Daboll. Because Daniel Jones, he got a lot out of Daniel Jones. I think he got a lot of juice out of that orange. You know what I'm saying? Like, he squeezed a lot out of Daniel Jones. He can do that with this 2nd round pick. He got a lot of Josh Allen, but that was a top 10 pick. I think it was like, what, 7?
Got a lot out of DeVito.
Got a lot out of DeVito. And that's not saying, hey, why don't you just take an undrafted guy since he gets a lot? It's like, no, give him somebody who has a high ceiling so he can get a lot out of that player with a high ceiling.
Right. Completely agree with you on that.
Jay Ferries, do you guys find it hard to believe that Daboll and Shane are willingly betting their futures on Daniel Jones? I do. Thank you so much, Jay Ferries, for the donation. And look, I think they once they gave him that contract, what else are you going to do? You're not going to turn around and throw this kid under the bus. You're going to say, no, we have a lot of faith in him. He tore his ACL, and that's the situation right now. I think behind closed doors, they're having different conversations than they are in front of the media. So I think they were backed into a corner after that win, and they thought, hey, give him Darren Waller, give him X, give him Y, give him a wide receiver, protect him a little bit more. We could do this again. And that's where their calculations were a little off.
Yeah. And I also don't know how willingly they're betting their futures on Daniel Jones. If they were losing, if they didn't get the 6 turnovers against Washington in that 2nd game, and Mac Jones didn't just absolutely, in my mind, tank a game for the Giants, they lose those 2 games, let's say, and they're picking inside the top 3. Then they might be taking a quarterback, and they may be willing to not bet their future on Daniel Jones. But right now, they might not willingly have any opportunity. If they don't believe that any of the quarterbacks left at 6 overall are going to be the quarterback of their future, and they're not confident at all in that, or they believe, like I said, maybe there's a guy at 39. They believe this guy might be able to, but it's not worth taking the risk of passing up on a blue chip like Neighbors or a blue chip like Odunze, or let's say they go with, the kid from Alabama, the edge, or whatever they may want to do, the corners in this draft. That's different to me. That's like, yeah, there's some good corners in this, and that's different to me than saying, I willingly decided not like, because again, it's just this idea of like forcing quarterback at 6. And I'm not saying that's what they're doing. If they take a quarterback at 6, Nick, and this is something I got into with Sal, by the way, today, because I just want to clarify my point. If they take a quarterback at 6, Nick, and it's not one of those 3, let's say it goes 1, 2, 3 quarterback, and then it's Harrison at 4, and I don't know, let's just say for the sake of this argument, but Bowers at 5. If that happens and the Giants then go quarterback, McCarthy, Penix, whoever it may be, at 6, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh my God, it's the worst decision ever. They're horrible. They're doing exactly what I said I don't want them to do, force a quarterback. Because 1, I haven't seen the film on a lot of these guys yet, and I don't really know how I feel about all of them. But 2, and more importantly, they have information that we don't have, and me and Nick will never have. They interview these guys. They know, they put them in front of the whiteboard, and they know where they're at from an IQ standpoint. It doesn't always work. Right? Daniel Jones was great in front of a whiteboard, but when the bullets start flying, his post-snap processing goes to shit. He can do it all in the film room, Jones. He studies his ass off. He's working hard, but then, and he can see it on the whiteboard, he can see it on his tablet, but then when the bullets are flying, and go take a look at Hard Knocks this year, by the way, the in-season one with the Dolphins. Look at the quarterback camera view they gave a few episodes with Tua Tagovailoa. You don't see much as a quarterback through that helmet, man. You really don't see much, like, especially if you're small like Tua. You're not seeing shit. You have to process this all in your head. Like Nick said, like you said, Nick, do the math in your head. You have to be willing to understand how defenses operate, how they shift their safeties and rotate shit down post-snap, and then you have to understand where the space is going to be and throw into that space. You have to understand that and do it quick in real time. Studying your ass off and doing it in front of a whiteboard is only going to get you so far, in my mind. You really have to do it when the bullets are flying. That's what really counts, and that's hard to project. So I still believe they take a quarterback at 6, Nick. They could view that as the guy, and we may not view it. Doesn't matter. It's their job to do that, not ours. So I'm not going to be mad at that. But I do think overall there is an opportunity cost. It's very different at 6 versus 39.
And then Jay Ferris, this is our last question. Thank you so much again. Says, JJ McCarthy is the squeaky clean, high upside, psychotic work ethic type Giants go for at quarterback.
True.
Only 20, super high upside. Dable getting all that from DeVito. Imagine with McCarthy to mold at pick 6.
I do think about that, Nick, because I feel like McCarthy is like a juiced up version of DeVito in a lot of ways. Similar stature, maybe McCarthy's a little bigger, but can grow into his body. McCarthy has better athleticism, but sneaky. They're both kind of sneaky athletic. McCarthy definitely has better, better arm talent, but it's not like jump off the page. He's not the biggest quarterback. He will throw outside the numbers. He's more than willing to throw tight windows, which is something DeVito was also willing to as well. Still some question marks about being in a pass heavy script. And so I think he does have some sneaky upside for this fit and for this system potentially, but we'll see what the Giants think on that front,
Exactly. And then we got one more before we get out of here, and it is from our guy, D-Kit. D-Kit, thank you so much. He asks, what moves or non-moves when free agency opens do you think will provide clues as to how the Giants will handle, among other things, the quarterback position? So this is specifically pertaining to the quarterback position. Do you have anything on this? Yeah. So, I mean, if they add, let's say, a Jameis Winston type, which is something that's been floated out there, I don't even know how they would make it work from a money standpoint. I'm sure they could do something, but like a quarterback for like $6-7 million a year or something like that. Like, I don't know if they're going to get a quarterback in the draft with one of their first 3 picks. Like, I don't know. Right. So, I thought you were going to go in another direction with the question, D-Kid, on free agents with the defense. But when it comes to the quarterback, I'm just not certain what they're going to do. I think we'll learn a lot in free agency. It seems like the rumors are that they're going to add a veteran, and that's their plan to challenge Daniel Jones. But I don't know if they have somebody graded highly who falls to them at the right pick. Would they not draft him? This is a game of numbers. You can't have 4 quarterbacks on your roster.
Right, exactly. And I think as far as just to tackle the parts of what Nick said, I don't put any stock into the quote on the report about the Giants not going quarterback in the draft and leaning toward veteran quarterback for Matt Miller. It was what he said.
That was from Miller.
Yeah, but it's like what he said he's hearing at the Senior Bowl. Like, you got to put a story out, in my opinion, when you're doing this job, and you have to be hearing things. But there's a lot of chatter. He probably heard that from
there's
people
smoke screens too,
Giants, and there's smoke screens too. So I don't really care about that. But there are things that D-Kit mentions here that could indicate us their plan that are unrelated to reports. For example, if right away the Giants restructure Daniel Jones' contract and push a lot of that cap hit back to 2025 and some of it back to 2026, I think it tells us they're not probably not going quarterback early in this draft. They're probably not going first round quarterback. It's not a definite, but it doesn't really add up or make any sense to push back salary cap bids for Daniel Jones into 2025 and 2026 and more dead cap there if you're going to draft a quarterback, because the whole point of drafting the quarterback is to get the cheap rookie contract scale so you can spend elsewhere. So I think that's a big one for me. Do they restructure that Jones contract or do they leave it alone? And I'm going to be quite frank, I really hope they don't restructure that contract. I don't care what it means for the 2024 season. I could care less if it means restructuring it if it means I'm worried about what it means for 2025 and what it means for 2026. This guy has a massive injury history, injured every year but one, missed games every year but one, 2 neck injuries and an ACL. Just the injuries alone, I wouldn't restructure that contract based on. That's that alone, let alone his horrible tape. That is quite frankly not good. And I'm not going to get too into that because it upsets people. But injuries alone, I don't think it's a good move. But that will tell us a lot, Nick. And if they restructure Okereke, if they restructure Dex, if they restructure Thomas, I think that tells us a lot too, because that says, look, they're kind of going all in on building around Jones. They're going to improve it. They're going to sign a guy like the kid from the Patriots offensive lineman. I don't know how to pronounce his name with the O. Oneo, whatever his name is.
Michael Winano.
Something like that. Yeah. Big splash him, re-sign Xavier, and then restructure those contracts. I think it tells us a lot about where they're going to go. But quarterback is going to be the interesting one. Like you said, if they sign a big name early in free agency, I think it tells us clearly that they don't like where they're at in the draft from a quarterback standpoint, and they're not feeling confident that they're going to get a guy they want at 6. But I still think they could draft someone too. Because, like, look at what the Lions did this year with Bridgewater and Hendon Hooker. And then they got lucky, not lucky, but they benefited from the fact that Hooker had the ACL and wasn't ready, so they could kind of pup list him and then keep him, have that extra roster space. And maybe that wasn't the original plan. I'm not sure, but I think it was. Giants may not have that benefit, but look, in my mind, if you got to keep 3 quarterbacks this season, is it not ideal for your special teams? Yes, Nick. Could it be best for what you're looking at long term? Maybe yes, Nick. Maybe yes, because there's an opportunity if they draft a quarterback and they sign like a Winston type or a Minshew type in free agency, they could then cut Jones in 2025, the season that I think really actually matters for this franchise, because I don't actually think they have any real chance to compete in 2024 unless they got lucky and drafted a Stroud type and he had that kind of Stroud type impact, is 2025. You have the backup you signed this year is the bridge, and then you have the rookie quarterback you drafted this year, and then you cut Daniel Jones and you get out of that contract. That still is in play and maybe their best long-term fit. And to me, I'm thinking long-term this entire offseason. It's the first time I've really ever done this, Nick, and I've ever really fully transitioned my mind to this, but I'm pretty set in my ways. Like, I don't really care about 2024 anymore unless they can get a Stroud type quarterback in the draft, which I don't think is going to be possible, but that would be the only way. Because I don't personally see any kind of ceiling I care about with Jones's QB1. Can Jones's QB1 get us back to 9 wins, win a playoff game maybe, but get killed by all the contenders? Sure. But I don't care about that anymore. I don't want that anymore. It's fine. We'll enjoy it while it lasts, and maybe it'll give us more false hope, which may end up being a bad thing long term. But I'm thinking 2025 as we head into the offseason. I'm curious if the Giants will be thinking that as well.
Let's hope.
Yeah, but it may not happen. We'll have to see. We don't know. We'll find out early though, DK. To answer your question, follow the restructures, follow the cap, see what they're doing with this thing. Are they pushing it back, especially on Jones' deal? If they're pushing it back, it tells us they're probably not investing in quarterback early. That would be my guess.
Yeah, I love our listeners. Nick, time to shave. You're looking like you were stranded on a desert. Wilson! Is that what you want, DK? Wilson. You want me to scream Wilson? Yeah. No, I do need to shave. You are correct. But, it happens.
It happens. It's the winter. It's the winter months. We're not
hockey beard. Playoff hockey beard.
Playoff hockey beard. All right. Thanks to everyone tuning into the Big Blue Banter podcast, the live show. Hope you had a good time and hope you learned something here and enjoyed it with us. We'll be back soon to discuss other parts of our offseason plan. And we might get into some more stuff on the film with the coordinator and things of that. I think Sal mentioned he'd love to hear us do another show like we did last year, breaking down the Ravens film with Wink, or 2 years ago, I should say, breaking down the Ravens. Maybe we'll do that with the Titans guy. If you have any ideas for good Titans content creators who study the tape, let me know. Let Nick know, and I'll reach out, and Nick will reach out, and we'll try to get them on the show because that would be a great show to have. So keep that in mind as well. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.